I'm just waiting for them. I'm probably gonna go out to the blue room so you guys can play. Or do you want to go out to the blue room?
Yeah.
How about you go out to the blue room? Hi.
Hey,
How's it going?
going good.
So I accidentally started the broadcast already.
All right,
My bad.
it's all good.
There's no going back now.
That's okay.
Okay. Well, I'm Shelby Darby,
I'm Amelia Harrington.
and I don't know what we're supposed to be doing.
I think we're supposed to be discussing our Amazing Grace paper, like the
Okay.
different questions throughout.
Just point by point.
I'm guessing so.
Well, that sounds fun.
Let me look.
That was what I understood, but I couldn't find if there was anything more specific other than just talking about it.
Yeah, it just says engage in a discussion about the 11 questions that you answered.
Okay. Well, surprise, Benedict Cumberbatch was in the movie. That was cool.
Right?
And Dumbledore.
Right? I was like, wow, there's so many well-known actors.
I know, it was stacked. I guess I could jump on into it.
Yeah,
Do you want to take the lead?
sure. So, first question is what doctrine in Wilbur's heart drove him to advocate? And why is the doctrine of family so important to have in your heart to be passionate and persistent? So, with regards to the doctrines, I talked about one of them being the value of human life. How, like, when he heard and saw the conditions that the slaves endured, like, that really kind of like drove it home for him.
Mhm.
And then another doctrine I brought up was the importance of equality for all humans. And how, he shared like throughout the movie that, men are created equal, which means that they should be treated equally as well. And so those were the two doctrines that I picked up.
Yeah, I found in common theme with you. I liked the all men are created equal, and I found some really interesting scriptures about that because nowhere in the Bible does it say that all men are created equal.
Right.
But there are lots of scriptures that kind of insinuate that. And one that I listed that I thought was really cool was in Proverbs 22, and it said, "The rich and the poor meet together. The Lord is the maker of them all." And I just thought that was really cool because, like, we know that Heavenly Father isn't a respecter of persons, and so if He's going to go and make people who will be rich and people who will be poor, and He doesn't see either of them as different in His eyes, or like one is lesser than another, then in His eyes they're equal, and in ours they should be too. And I thought that was really cool that He embraced those teachings, and that His faith led Him to such great action.
Yeah, I agree. And I was just about to bring the, Lord's not a respecter of persons. He doesn't say that, white folk are better than black folk. Like, that's not what we've been taught. We're all equal. And so I like saying that, that even though during a time where that thought was socially acceptable, he was fighting against that current of that idea.
Absolutely. One other doctrine that I thought kind of led him was that he understood the purpose of like a calling. In the very beginning of the movie, he said that God found him, and he kind of embraced that finding and that recognition that like God found him, and by finding him, I think he meant he found this individual with this like multifaceted education and understanding of the slave trade, and also someone who was willing to be like guided. God found him and was willing to work through him, and that was kind of a doctrinal point that I thought was really cool, was that he just rose to that calling.
Yeah, I think that's cool too. I hadn't thought about it, but you're totally right. In the beginning, he's like, um, I have found God, or God has found me, whatever the phrasing was. And what I thought was kind of neat with that is that he didn't back down from it. He didn't just say like, "Oh, it's too hard. No one's gonna want to do this." He stuck with it, and like as you said, like he was, a member of the parliament. Like he was well known for his speaking ability, and then he also found religion and was able to merge the two through that advocacy position that he held.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really cool insight. So when it came to like why having the doctrine in our heart is important, one thing I was thinking about is that like we have to have the doctrine in our hearts to even have a desire to make a difference for those around us. Like if we only have like a shallow understanding of it, then we're not going to leap to action, like because I was thinking, at the beginning of the semester, we'll kind of talk about this at the end of the questions, but the beginning of the semester, like I know the proclamation ends with the call for responsible citizens to act, and defend the family. And I knew that was a thing that was in there, like I understood that we were called, but I didn't have the understanding in my heart to follow through with that, So
yeah, I totally see that.
Yeah.
I totally feel that way. I think one of the points that I brought up in my paper was very similar to that, to piggyback. It says, I was talking about persistence and how persistence demonstrates loyalty. And when we're loyal to the doctrines of God regarding the family, we're loyal to God as well as our brothers and sisters. And I brought up the scripture from Mosiah 18:9 that talks about I said, as we persistently advocate for family doctrines the Lord has established at all times and in all things and in all places, we strengthen our eternal covenants. And though William Wilberforce wasn't LDS, he was definitely like bringing himself closer to God. And I think that that's something that we can all do not in despite of our religion, but independent of our religion.
Right. Along with that too, there was a quote, one of the classes, I can't remember it word for word. But another thing I talked about was how when we understand the doctrine, it changes our behavior. That something along the lines of like, you can change your behavior, but it's not going to change. It's only like a temporary change, right? Like only when you understand the doctrine is when your behavior actually changes.
Yeah.
And I think Elder Bednar talks about it, and I think there's someone else who brings it up too. But understanding the doctrine leads us to act on it, to use our agency to defend it. And so then through understanding it, we're becoming agents rather than agents to act rather than to be acted upon.
I love it. Yeah, I very much feel that and can relate to that ideology.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because we're members of the same faith.
Right? I wonder why. But yeah, so that was something like I noticed. And my other point kind of just goes along with that as well, as like we just won't, if we don't understand it, we won't have that drive to see it through. It'll be one of those like, if we don't have the understanding in our hearts, it'll be like a New Year's resolution. Like if we don't have that the understanding of the specific doctrine, then we're not going to follow through on it,
Well, there's no like motivating factor.
Exactly.
That's like deep rooted enough. Most of them would just be superficial or out of like concern rather than true understanding.
Right. Like if your goal for the New Year's was to lose 15 pounds because you wanted to look good or whatever, and that was as far as it went. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You're going to say, who cares about how I look? I'd rather have ice cream. But if like you understand the importance of maintaining a healthy body and a healthy mind and whatnot, and have that deeply rooted in your heart, then you'll be more likely to follow through.
I totes agree. Do you want me to take the next one?
Sure.
Okay. How did Wilbur employ a theoretical front-burner approach to becoming a more effective advocate? Identify at least one thing in each system and be specific. So I interpreted this question as the theoretical to the like ecological approach. Is that what you got?
Yeah,
it was
like
a funky
microsystem, mesosystem. That's what I have. So
I did the best I could with this, but I really did struggle. For the microsystem, I said that in the film, Wilberforce gained greater insight of African microsystems by seeking details about separation, torture, and death. He listened as clergymen and other witnesses illustrated the circumstances of families forced into the slave trade. And then the other point I brought up was that we also learned that he and his movement inspired families to boycott products brought to India that brought to England that had anything to do with slavery, so that those family units were unified in that goal.
Okay, so I didn't know which like way to go at this, so I kind of thought of how did they advocate towards that system specifically. Okay. But I totally agree with your answer. Like I think that's a great application. I talked about how he specifically taught he taught families about the conditions that people experienced, and like of things that happened on the slave ship and their living conditions.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was like he targeted, individuals and families to teach them about what's happening in the slave trade and the conditions that are a result of that.
I think that's what I said in the first part too. I think she'll interpret them as like a solid effort.
Right.
Like effort. I didn't know what else to do.
Right.
Yeah. He tried to teach families. It was hard because I don't think there was like a specific time other than when he was like, when he orchestrated that ship passing by.
Right.
And there was like a wife and a husband, a member of parliament that saw. But yeah. I couldn't think of, other than like informing them through other means, which could be macrosystem. I don't know. Or anyway.
So
we did good.
For the mesosystem, I talked about how Wilbur and his associates, they taught the members of the community about the process that goes into making sugar, and like what results on the end of the slaves and how, they get hurt and whatnot. And that led them to stop purchasing sugar from the community. So that was like the connection between the family and the community that I made for the mesosystem.
I like that. It's funny because I used the same thing but for a different
system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I said that the occurrence of boycotts brought stress upon relationships between family and their staff members or family and their peers.
Okay, yeah.
Which I think might count. I don't know. I was like, I struggled to apply this because when you talk about the microsystem, the mesosystem, you're talking about child development. And there weren't really children involved. I mean, there were, but we didn't get to learn about much of that other than from Barbara. Is that her name?
I think so.
So I don't know. Hopefully it was good enough.
I think it's a good connection. For the exosystem, I said that they worked with Parliament to abolish slavery, that they passed a bill that allowed for slave traders to be stunted in their business.
Yep, easy.
Yeah. Felt like that was the easiest one to identify.
Yeah.
And then for the macro system, I talked about how Wilbur and his associates, they appealed to his culture's value of freedom and human rights because they're more of an individualistic culture. And so he kind of used those values to persuade them.
I like that. I took it a different route. I thought that the macro system was where he worked most efficiently because I basically talked about like his research and how he informed individuals and families of all socioeconomic statuses through books, songs, drawings, handouts, invitations, to see and smell slave ships. And I think just like the using that media outlet to
Right.
to influence the macro system was the angle I was trying to get at.
Right. Well, yeah, and like the macro system is about how um the culture in general. And so I think like he utilized the media found within the culture to persuade them accordingly.
Yep,
That
that's
makes um did you have anything else in that section? Because I just had one for each.
no, I didn't
Okay.
do the chrono system.
I didn't either, just because we haven't really talked about that throughout our discussions.
Yeah.
So all right. So, how did Wilbur and his fellow advocates do and share their research? Um, and then, what evidence do they provide to persuade those opposing or on the fence? So, a couple of things I talked about with doing their research is that they sent out members of their group to different parts of the area. Like they talked about how they sent them to like Liverpool and whatever nearby locations and had them interview people who worked on the ships, who were slaves, doctors who worked with them, and kind of got their like firsthand experience. And then also, um, they gathered further research. It's like personal experiences from the slaves and like data that they've collected. Like the lawyer guy towards the end was talking about how they've gathered all this data of stories and statistics and stuff regarding, I think, deaths, because they did talk about how there's 600 enter the boat, 200 about leave or survive.
Yeah.
So those were, in terms of doing their research, that's what I said. And then to share it, they published the book. The guy who was a slave, he published his like personal biography as being a slave.
Mm-hmm.
They also, as we talked about earlier, like they arranged, I called them members of the high society to be on a boat that allowed them to hear of what the living conditions were like for the slaves, and then also to learn about like the consequences of living on the ship, as he provided the data of how many survive, and then also the sensation of the smell that they experienced through that.
Yep, those were the points that I had as well. The only one that I added to that would be the petition with the 390,000 people opposing slavery,
Yeah.
including Charles Fox, who had like a huge influence in Parliament. So
Yeah. Well,
those
then
are
also, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
um the transport. Oh, his. I thought that it was cool. I didn't talk too much about this. I just said that there was a clergyman who had worked on a slave ship and transported nearly 2,000 men, women, and children. And I just focused on how those stories help the English people to understand that slaves were not a lesser people created by God
Right.
to work in fields, that they were mothers, brothers, fathers, and children suffering under an oppressor. And I think that really made a huge difference because that was the understanding. Like, and I think it wasn't really brought out in the film as much. There were only like hints of this mentality that I think the film focused on like the economics behind the slave trade, but really there was just a mindset of like the white people in England who felt like blacks were stupid and that they were incapable of thinking at like a high enough level to understand government and economy and all of those things. And so those accounts were so vital to understanding that they were people, not just equal, but people, because that was a basic understanding that a lot of people didn't have.
Yeah, I totally get that. I was gonna write that in mine, but it's like they like talk about it for a second, but I don't know if they used it. Like I don't know if that was actually used to persuade them.
It was really brief.
Yeah, I'm very literal when it comes to interpreting questions. And so it's like, I don't know if they used it to persuade them.
Oh, totally. Yeah, the people who, there was a scene where the people were coming to, I don't know how to say his name, Olada Equiano,
Oh yeah.
the freed slave.
Yeah.
And they were just like so happy to meet him and to understand more about him. Because at first they were like really skeptical, and then they realized, oh, you're a competent human being. I didn't know. And
Right.
so that was kind of a cool scene.
Yeah. Another thing that I talked about with helping switch the opposing side to changing their opinion was Wilbur painting the picture of how the sugar is created and like what goes on through that process and what the living conditions are like. And in the movie, they talk about how that led to people like not purchasing sugar or purchasing sugar that wasn't made by slaves. So I thought that was one that was kind of like a key piece.
Yeah, totally. I love that. I didn't even think about that. So that's awesome.
That's why we have these discussions, right?
Yeah, go team.
I think, oh, and then I just also said that they presented their research to the parliament is kind of, that was the other way of sharing their research was by presenting it to parliament.
Yeah. I mentioned that they also like had open meetings at his home to talk with to gather like-minded individuals. And
right.
So those meetings offered people so a chance to create sort of a sense of camaraderie and unify them in purpose.
Yeah, I think that's great. I didn't even like catch on to that.
Go team.
Yeah. All right. So next question. You want to lead that one?
Yeah. How does the film portray the importance of working together as a group? What has family advocacy group work taught you? This is kind of fun because we were in the same group together. I said that without the collaborative efforts of the group working in tangent with Wilberforce, he likely wouldn't have accepted like the challenge that was set before him. From the very beginning, he relied on William Pitt and Thomas Clarkson and John Newton to bolster his spirits and give him direction and guidance. So I'm really not sure, like just by the way they portrayed it in the film, how like on the fence he was about moving forward. But I think that those group of specific individuals gave him a lot of encouragement. The next point I had was that his group of anti-slave advocates gathered research and insight that Wilberforce couldn't have acquired alone. Their efforts gave him his platform, substance, and evidence that was irrefutable. And then I talked about how his group offered him new insights about the slave trade that strengthened and challenged his own personal convictions. Initially, this led to his commitment to taking the issue to Parliament. However, later in the film, we see that it brought about a recommitment when things got hard and he had begun to feel like he lost.
Yeah.
And then if you want to talk about that part, and then we'll go back and address the second part of the question.
Yeah, so I brought up the petition, how they had over, 390,000 people sign it. One person can't do that. You have to have a group to be able to even get to that many people. And then, yeah, as you said, like that they needed a larger group to be able to access the wide variety of people, to gain all that information. Especially since they had to split up to even get a hold of the doctors treating slaves or the tradesmen or the slaves themselves, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's see. I'm trying to see what else. So yeah, as you also said, like they made a big difference with working as a group.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
One person couldn't have done it on their own. So.
no, especially not in that situation where there's so many people against you that they needed that support.
She's waving. Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, that you pretty much covered everything else I was gonna say.
Okay. Well, cool. Go team.
Yeah.
So the next part was, what has my family advocacy group taught me? Um, that I talked about how you guys have opened my eyes to perspectives and insights that weren't initially on my radar of thinking. And at times you challenged me to be open-minded to points where I didn't initially agree. Other times I felt impressed to offer my insights, which I felt were right and worth defending, despite the uncomfortable nature of controversy. And then I talked about another point, which was kind of fun. I thought of you actually when I was typing, because I was like, oh, Shelby, this is cool. I talked about how group work has helped me understand why the first presidency and the quorum of the 12 apostles are insistent on coming to a unanimous decisions regarding church policy and other gospel-related matters. I discovered that when my group was in agreement, there was a sense of peace and growth among us all. We had a shared cause, a mutual understanding, and a stronger position of voice when advocating our truth.
Yeah,
So
I think that's solid. I completely agree. So, like, I took this question as a viewpoint from the video rather than like our own personal family group work. So I might go through and no, it's just completely different interpretation.
Yeah.
But I talked about how, you know, you can make a big difference when you're in a group. Because, you know, as you talked about with the video, like you can encourage each other when times are tough. Like you can kind of push each other when you really need that extra push to keep going. And then also like when you work as a group, I was thinking back to A Sacred Duty. That story we had to read this semester was like, you know, how much of an impact that he made couldn't have been done if it was just by himself. He had to have the help of several different team members to gather all the information he needed to make enough copies for everybody, you know, and to just facilitate the whole process. So it's something I thought about. And then also, working in a group allows you to bounce ideas off of each other and come up with one that makes a difference. So that particular thought came from the scene where they're discussing how there's the new guy that they just brought in, the lawyer, towards the end, and he's sharing how they've gathered data, they've gathered personal stories, but it's not going to make a difference because that's the same route they've taken this whole time. And so through his different idea, they were able to come up with that policy that was like completely blindsiding other members of the parliament, right?
Yeah.
Like instead of, you know, it sounded like it was just to do with flags and patriotism, but in reality, it had to heavily do with slave trading and would, you know, run them out of business. And so had they not worked as a group and it was just one person, they would have been stuck with that one-sided way of doing things.
Totally.
So it totally, as you said, like gives you different perspectives and ways of going about solving things.
Yeah.
So those were the things that I picked up on. And then I totally agree with you with your presidency comment of how they work until they come to a unanimous decision, right? Like there's no one who's ever left with an unresolved thought, or, you know, like they're not in disagreement. They always come to an agreement. And I think that's like that's key effective group work. You know,
I totally
because when we have with our last project, there were a few things that I definitely was not in agreement with, and
Oh yeah?
I could see it hinder my desire to even do anything.
Which
But
assignment was that? The
it was
pornography?
the page one, yeah, the page one.
Oh, what was
So
it that like you were like, what the heck? I don't agree.
it was just like there were just a couple of different things that came up that I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. But
You're
I let it
totally
go.
deflecting. I want to know what like specifically bothered you. I'm
So
curious.
okay, so specific. Well, first off, the topic. I didn't really care for the topic, but I was
No.
like, whatever. If that's what people are okay with, then I guess we'll do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have a topic to really, you know, present anyway. But then the other thing was the way we went about gathering attention on the page. Like I mentioned, including like some mind-blowing data, right? Like starting off with like this a statistic, and I was immediately like shot
Somebody shut
down.
you down. I
Yeah,
remember that.
immediately
Somebody was
shot
like,
down.
statistics don't matter. I was like, what? I ended up posting one on the page that it was like 1 in 5 cell phone searches is for porn.
Right. And I posted some too later on.
I was like, that's so interesting.
But yeah, I was like, to me, I was like, I don't know about you, but I'm analytical and I like the data. I like seeing, you know, like, oh my gosh, 1 in 5? Like, that's crazy, you know,
Yeah.
with how many searches there are.
Yeah.
Or, you know, just like, to me, that's what draws me in is if I have to read the page, like, I read the page anyway. And so if I read something that's interesting, you know, an attention grabber, then I'm gonna read it. I don't
Yeah.
look at pictures, so to me, I was just like, it doesn't make sense, but whatever.
Yeah.
It's end of the semester. I don't care.
I kind of felt the same way in some regards, and then I just like went in right before we turned it in and added extra stuff that I thought was cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Like no one's gonna like stop me. So
Right, yeah. So I added statistics on the page
you
too.
go, girl.
But anyway, like I have seen where that makes a difference in your desire to do anything, you know? So
for sure. I love that.
yeah. What else? So I think we covered that question.
Yeah, I think we're ready to move on.
Okay, so next one. What parallels do you see between Wilbur and Captain Moroni in chapter 4 in Alma 46? And we'll just talk about that one quickly.
Yeah.
And so one thing I talked about was how Wilbur rallied the people, right? Just as Moroni rallied the people. Although Wilbur was rallying people to abolish slavery, and Moroni was rallying people to defend their religion. And so that was like one big thing I saw is they both took a stand amongst the crowd who didn't quite favor that position to begin with.
Yep.
So that was something I noticed. And then also just Wilbur's connection to God. Throughout the movie, you see him praying to God and sharing his thoughts with him. And, you know, as we read in Alma 46, Moroni is constantly like praying to the Lord for strength and guidance. And I feel like that's what Wilbur did as well.
I concur.
Any
I'll
other
take
things?
the next part of the question because
Okay.
Yeah. So I just said that I quoted the scripture from Alma 46:15 that talked about what a Christian is, and then I added that a Christian is a person who seeks to emulate Christ and recognizes him as their Savior and Redeemer. And then I defined a professional family advocate as someone who seeks to effectively persuade others of methods, concepts, and policies that will benefit family function, child development, and familial rights.
Okay. I kind of read the question like, what is a Christian professional family advocate? Is the way I read it instead of what is a Christian and professional family advocate. I don't know. It could be the same. Who knows? Anyway, so my answer for that, which I agree with your answer, you got great definitions.
Thanks. I made them myself.
Awesome. So I said a person who advocates for others being guided by Christian principles. That's what my definition for that was.
I dig it.
Oh, and then also, how he exemplified that was by fighting for the human rights of slaves. You know, as Christians, we believe that humans are equal, and he fought for slaves to obtain that right.
Totally. I didn't add that, but I think that's a very good insight.
Thank you.
You're welcome. For the last part of the question. Oh, never mind. Yeah. You go.
Just gonna transition, but you can.
Oh, I was gonna say for the last part of the question, I said that we can use good research, teach correct doctrines and principles within the microsystem, advocating with one's neighborhood and community, and using social media as a means to teach, inform, and debate calmly are great ways to be effective and Christ-like. And then I added like some personal stuff about living in Babylon.
Okay.
And building Zion. But yeah.
Yes. So I talked about not allowing contention to enter the conflict.
I love that. I thought of Jesse.
Yeah.
From our discussion board. I thought about that too.
Yeah. So because we don't have to have contention in conflict. Conflict can be beneficial. It helps us learn and to grow, but it's not beneficial if it's contentious. So that was one way I talked about being effective in Christ-like. And then also I thought about, there was a talk that I read in the last couple of semesters that talked about how like we need to respond to people in a Christ-like manner. So with regards to like the loud voices, I talked about how not every loud voice needs a response, right? Like, yeah. So some people, they can make a point, and depending upon your judgment of the situation, guidance of the Spirit, sometimes it's better to just say nothing and just kind of walk away, because they could just be contentious. Like my stepdad's that way. He'll make arguments against the church, and like you have to judge whether or not it's like if it's really going to be effective to discuss this at the moment.
His heart enough to even make a difference at the time.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing. And another one was like sometimes responses. So sometimes we just don't respond at all. Other times we can just give like a short, testimony. And other times it's appropriate to teach if you can tell that it's going to be received, right? Yeah, and so sure. I was just, to me, it was just like, be guided by the Spirit in your responses and be aware of their receptivity to teachings.
On my mission, some of the most like powerfully spiritual moments were moments where I was with people who were either antagonistic towards the church or who were just receiving lessons, and we weren't saying anything at all. And right. It was beautiful and a very like awakening. I don't know. There was an awakening from both sides, for the missionary who goes about kind of feeling the same every day and is used to that a certain level of spirituality, to these like overwhelmingly powerful moments in silence where God's just doing his work.
Right. Because ultimately, like, along with that is that people aren't taught by your words, they're taught by the Spirit. Mm-hmm. So you have to elicit an environment that provides the Spirit an opportunity to preside.
I dig it.
So those were my thoughts.
Very cool.
All right. So next one. Marcia Barlow spoke on persuasive speaking and writing. Did Wilbur and others exemplify any of Marcia's ideas, and how so? So one thing I talked about was that, as we learned from Marcia's presentation, to weave your values into your speaking, and that's exactly what Wilbur and his associates did. Specifically, they talked about like the conditions of the slave ships and human rights, right? And shared stories that exemplify the importance of human equality. So that was one that I brought up.
I love that. one. Is it my turn?
Yes, you can bring one up too.
Okay, I'll bring one up too. Um, so I thought that she
I want.
taught me that when tough questions come, you better have a tough response.
Mm-hmm.
And he totally did this with his SmackDown when they were like, the opposing side was like, all people in Britain don't want their livelihoods to change, and so they want slavery. And then he was like, actually, I have this very fat scroll full of signatures of 390,000 people who disagree with you, which I thought was cool. And then another one I talked about was that she spoke about how emotive responsive aren't as effective in changing perspectives as research which pulls on the heartstrings of people, and he obviously did that. I could get into specifics, but you know. And so then I talked about the ship, and the other thing I found that I thought was cool was how she talked about the importance of finding what drives your opponent and then use it to your own advantage. For the members of parliament who were opposing the abolishment of slavery, I said that they wanted money, power, and control over trade to benefit their personal interests and their families. These men, they kind of built up like a platform of understanding how everyone felt, and that they were basing their views on like Christianity. And Wilbur destroyed that. He spoke about how it's immoral and ungodly, and educated their wives and daughters and sons to feel that what was going on was wrong. And so I think he kind of like Trojan horse the situation. Like he got into their homes and then, had those pressures on the members of parliament who could make a difference.
Right. Yeah, I think those are great. So you talked about providing facts that pull on the heartstrings. I talked about specifically how Marcia taught us to appeal to values that we both hold. And so care and compassion I brought up specifically about when Wilbur, I was thinking of the scene when Wilbur taught the people on the boat about what happens on that slave trader boat, right? And how he shared with him how 600 slaves enter the boat, but only 200 make it out alive. And you can see like the look on their faces. There's one woman who is crying, right? Yeah. And like teaching how it's men, women, and children. Like they're all experiencing these like terrible living conditions. And then, just using values that appeal to the other side. Another tactic was to understand the arena you're working in. So he understood that they wanted, profit, that they were against their livelihood being taken away and stuff. And so they adjusted their tactic. And specifically, I was thinking of how they created the policy that made it look more patriotic and, kind of like something that wasn't going to make much of a difference, but in reality, it made a huge difference for them. And then also just like using stories in your arguments, specifically how that gentleman published a book about his personal experience as a slave, as you talked about earlier, to show, show that he is a human, to show what he had to deal with and, everything like that. So those were the very technical aspects that she taught us.
Yeah, I love that. Those are definitely some of those things I thought about and some of them I didn't. So go team.
Yeah.
Do you want me to take the next one?
Sure. So it started off as the first question here. So what role did the government, policy, and religious freedom play in the fight of the slave trade? So I talked about how government was used as the center stage to lobby for the abolition of slavery. And that in the fight against slave trade, Wilbur and his associates used policy to change the state of slave trade. And then also by allowing religious freedom to the people, Wilbur was able to fight according to his Christian beliefs. Because if he, in the beginning, learn how he's trying to debate between doing the work of God or doing the work of politics, and he learns he can do both. And so if they didn't have religious freedom, he wouldn't have felt like he had that opportunity.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love how we had totally different answers on this one. It's kind of exciting.
Right.
Um, so I talked about how the King of England was insane at the time, and many members of Parliament. I'm such like a pessimist. Yours are all like fluffy and sweet, like optimist. And I was like, everybody sucks. So the King of England at the time was insane, and many members of Parliament hid behind their like loyalty to him, as he supported the slave trade and then grew richer and fatter. And then I talked about how policy permitted the enslavement of the African people, but it also permitted abolitionists to speak in opposition to laws that were in place in hopes for change. So there were like two separate policies there. One was good and one was not, but was actually atrocious. I was going to say not so good, but it was atrocious. And so that was good. And then the last one I had was that many conversations were had over the pulpit against slavery. There was freedom for fathers and for pastors to speak the word of God and help the advocates against slavery gain momentum and then keep it. Even though in the end, like towards the end, when the war in France was going on, there was like one scene in the church where like people got up and left when he's talking about it. But at the same time, like religion in England has been so sucky for so long that like if the wrong people were in power and there was only one true church in England at the time, they could have been influenced to be pro-slavery and not have had the freedom to make to affiliate themselves with a church that felt otherwise and represented the accurate feelings of God. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Another thing that your point just reminded me of was, I don't remember what his role was, but the gentleman in the beginning who worked as like a slave trader, right? And he had the 2,000 ghosts haunt him. And he was a man of God. I don't know what his role was, but
I had his name in here somewhere. Oh, John Newton, I think was his name.
Yeah. And like if religious freedom wasn't really a thing, he may have continued with his way of living, right? If the church was influenced through politics to support slavery, then he may not have ever kind of pulled away from that life. I think they said that he created the song Amazing Grace. And so, just that song just kind of shows how his religious freedom has allowed him to become free from, the sins of slavery and whatnot. And so I think that's like a great point, as you mentioned, is that the religious freedom allowed them to be in churches that were separate from the political ideals, of the parliament.
I love that. It's a great example.
Thank you.
What did you say for the second part?
So I said that I talked specifically about the parliament as a political system. And I felt that they were not pro-family, because to me, it seemed like they were way more concerned about profits than human life. And I think pro-family has to encompass all human life. It can't just encompass their own families. Because as great as it is for families to have, certain livelihoods, and as much as I respect the decision to try to protect that so you can support your own family, they weren't supporting just families in general, because they were allowing children, men, women, and children to be sold as slaves. And so to me, I took it as an overall thing that they were not pro-family.
Okay. I felt similarly, but not exactly the same.
Right.
I said that I felt their political system was pro-English family. They sought to bolster their
Right.
economy, which would provide great opportunity for rising generations. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I said that in their system for allowing house discussions attempting to represent the general popular opinion would also be pro-family, as long as they accurately represented those beliefs and opinions. That said, they certainly weren't pro-African family. So
Right.
I can't say that they were pro-family overall. So,
Right. Well, and another thing's interesting is you mentioned like the voice of the people, right?
mhm.
And like there's a scene where they were like they pretty much said, who cares about the 390,000 people who are on your petition? No, we're the judges over the land, who cares about the voice of the people? Which to me, if they're ignoring the voice of the people, then I don't see them being like pro family to that degree,
Yeah, yeah, I would
So,
agree with you there. It
yeah.
it's all contingent upon their like personal commitment to represent,
Right.
the things that they're over. And I think
Yeah.
some genuinely tried, um,
Yeah.
but I can't say that happened in every situation.
Yeah. I can't say their whole system was pro
So,
family. There were definitely like members who were,
mm-hmm.
but yeah. Um, and I think that covers it because we talked about the why or why nots.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you want to catch this one?
Sure. Do you feel that Wilbur used his time on Earth well? How did you see him showing the elements of consecration from that Elder Christopherson spoke of? Because we're getting to the end of the time, I'm just going to read what I have kind of quickly. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Few men have used their time better on Earth. England was the greatest power on Earth at that time. When their views and policies on slavery changed, they set an example for the world to follow. Imagine the number of lives and generations to come that were forever changed by what William Wilberforce accomplished. And then I broke down Elder Christopherson's talk. I talked about time and choice. Wilberforce walked by faith and chose to do good over evil. And then I talked purity. His message was pure in concept and delivery. He sought to bring past the equality of man. Work. He worked tirelessly to gather evidence to prove the conditions of the slaves were horrid and they deserved far better. Respect for body, though his chronic stress was what most assumed led to his illness and subsequent death, he got rid of harmful and addictive opioids in an effort to be clear of mind so that he could press forward. Service. He served as a representative of Africans, Christians, and hundreds of thousands of Englishmen. He also served his wife in his kindness, stimulative conversation, and loving affection and appreciation. Integrity. His first priority was to bring forth God's established truth. He knew that his reputation and pockets would be challenged by his opposition, yet he knew that this was his mission. His advocacy was his mission, and a calling whereby he would receive the support of loyalists of God rather than the lobbyists with interest in personal gain and wealth.
All right.
All right, that was a lot, but
Um, so I just have short and sweet bullet points here. So I said that he did use his time on Earth well because, as you learn at the end of the movie, he battled injustice throughout his whole life, up until the end of his life. And then also he found the purpose of his life, which was to advocate for the rights of others, and he did all he could to fulfill that purpose. From what we saw in the movie, he didn't spend most of his time being idle. He was constantly working on ways to battle injustice. And specifically, they talked about, in the reunion of the two gentlemen, when he pulled one from, I don't know, some cottage somewhere, he's like, don't I have time to bathe and to sleep? And he's like, time to sleep, And
yeah,
so to me, I took that as like, he wasn't an idle man. They also talked about how he dedicated himself to fighting for his Christian principles by advocating for things in the parliament that would make the world a better place, and how he didn't wait to act. He continually pursued the issue until it was finally resolved. Those were the things that I brought up.
nice.
All right. So, any other profound thoughts or personal insights from the movie that are related to child and family advocacy? So the thoughts I had were, we can't wait until the environment's suitable for change. We must act now. Advocacy isn't going to be easy, but it will be worth it. Many people may oppose change at first, but through education and time, you can change their minds. We don't have to be violent in our fight for justice. We can advocate in a Christ-like and peaceful manner. And also, a supportive spouse can help us continue along the path of advocacy and push us to be the best we can.
I talked about a supportive spouse too. I only had 2 bullet points here.
Okay.
I thought we talked about a lot of profound thoughts the entire paper. So
right.
I hope she's not like, fail. But I said, though there were no obvious ties between England's policy regarding slavery and English children and family, now I see that there were many obvious ties. I see that the microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, macrosystem, and chronosystem were very much impacted by slavery, and this was directly tied to those permissive policies. And then I talked about his sweet wife and how it's good to find somebody who is willing to be your teammate.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I felt like she was like pertinent to his re-entry into the situation. So
yeah, for sure.
That's an important thing. All right, I'll just read the next one. So what was your understanding of the doctrine of the family at the beginning of the semester, and how has it changed? So I just talked about how at the beginning of the semester, I understood that the family is that the family is central to God's plan, and also that we've been called to defend and advocate for the family. But after taking this course, I've come to have those doctrines placed into my heart, as we talked earlier. And as I had known of them before, I hadn't completely understood the true importance of them.
Okay. Very cool. And you kind of know this, I think, probably maybe, because you've been in my group the whole semester. At the beginning of the semester, I tried to advocate for like individual rights. And so that's kind of what I talked about, that I believed that the beliefs of other people won't affect the beliefs of my family. And I kind of had a to each their own mentality. And then I talked about how remaining neutral is to respect agency, and that's what God wants. And now I see that there's a threat on conservative religious families. We have freedoms and rights that can be taken away as the humanist agenda and mindset becomes more and more prevalent in our individualistic society. Informing and advocating for beliefs of my family is essential for the well-being of my family and the families like mine. And then to each not their own. Many people believe that they want what they want to, but there's a greater will for all to be progressive and turn from religious-based moral values. I didn't see or want to see this before. As my generation influences political policy, it's vital that I share my opinions and perspectives effectively and demonstrate the benefits of my way of life in a relatable and irrefutable way. And then my last point was that neutrality isn't godly. God wants us to respect agency, but he needs us to do his work. Sharing the gospel is a commitment that is the utmost importance because these are the last days. And I think you kind of mentioned that in your last point too, that we just have like it's personal. It's a very personal responsibility placed on our shoulders.
I agree. I think you had some great insights, and I love how you were able to see the transition between supporting individual rights and the rights of the family and how that's changed throughout. Because I've seen that as well as I've studied the proclamation and whatnot throughout my time at BYU.
Yeah. It's crazy because I very much, I don't know, I have so many close people that I love and care for that feel so differently than me about basic family values. And it's not okay. Like, I've always wanted to be like, no, and that's okay. They can do what makes them happy, which they can do what makes them happy. But at the same time, things are getting to a point where like my personal beliefs will be threatened, and that's not cool. So I don't know. We just have to have like a mutual understanding going forward to protect conscience and to protect belief.
I agree. All right, so last question. So picture your spouse and children and write down some thoughts about how they'll benefit from you taking this class. So short and sweet. I just talked about being more aware of laws and policies that can impact my children and my family. I've learned how I can advocate for my family, even if it's in little ways. Gained a deeper understanding of the importance of families in the plan of salvation and the call to action we've received. And also how I want to be more active in advocating for my family and their ultimate well-being as members of our society.
Dig it. Mine were short and sweet this time. This was like the only post where they were short and sweet. My son will know where we stand on current event issues. He will be encouraged to form his own opinions and beliefs prayerfully and studiously. My husband will feel of my open love and support for him as he advocates for our family. He will also be proud of his duty to love and support me as I advocate for families. Our future children will feel empowered and confident as they face a world with confusing ideologies because of the principles and topics of conversation that will prepare them in home. At home, that will prepare them. That's what I should say. Sorry, it didn't make a lot of sense. Anyway, we're done.
Awesome. Thank you for the wonderful discussion. I was worried, like, how are we supposed to meet an hour with just two of us?
Yeah.
No problem.
Totally made.
Yeah. We hit that nail on the head.
I have a couple of classes where like people are always on my team because we have like these ridiculous word amounts that we have to have for our assignments, and I'm really good at filler stuff and like just like conversing away. And so
right,
2,000 word count, I got this, don't you worry. And they're like, they send me like tiny little bullet points of ideas, and I'm like 2014 words later. Sorry, I'm glad it went well. I think it was very thorough.
I agree. And I'm like listening to your responses like, geez, I feel like I oversimplified mine. I need to add some more stuff to my paper.
No, I thought they were totally good. Being concise is not bad. She even said, I think on the announcement page, that you can totally be concise. So
right. She did say the longer the better, though.
Yeah, but your responses, I don't know if you were like reading word for word or not, but they seemed very well thought out. That was demonstrated by your replies. So.
Oh, well, thank you. Most of them are, I read the bullet point and then explained it further.
Oh.
I'll go and explain them further now.
I put a couple of notes from like ideas that you had. I was like, oh, that's great. I should like.
Right?
Yeah. I should.
I'm like, oh, all of your responses are like, wow, Shelby's actually like reflect that she's learned stuff from the course.
You're amazing, Amelia. I'm sure she'll know it from your things. And maybe if you feel like you need to add some, I feel like I need to add some too. So
Dude, I think you're solid. I don't think you need to add any more. She might just skim through yours by the end of the.
I know. I just really like to talk. I bet she'll be like, okay. My word count for my like whole thing, it's 6 pages long and it's 2,524 words.
Oh, I gotta see mine. Yeah, mine's only at 1,400.
Some people just are chatty Cathy's. That's me.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Shelby. I'm glad we were able to meet this deadline in time, and
glad we're able to get it out of the way.
Yeah. So
so I will send her the link, and I'll let you know. Right. I'll text you when I do that, just so you know.
Okay. And I think the link with the title being like Family 460 Section 4, and then her names.
Okay.
There's like specifications on her announcement.
I will need the specifications.
Yeah, just look over that so that way you don't get thrown off.
Okay. Oh, I have an ant on me. Ew. Okay. What a better way to end the conversation.
Right. All right. Well, good luck the rest of the semester.
Thanks. You too.
Only a couple more minutes to go.
Yeah. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.